Katharina, I'm so happy that you're joining me today to talk about some really quite shocking findings when it comes to women and their access to power and influence. And I think probably, unfortunately, they're not going to be shocking to most women. But I think what it does do is it shines a light on some very specific reasons that we're not able to exercise power and influence in the economy in life. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing a bit more about those findings and that data. But how about you talk a little bit about you first and
Mhm.
your organization and a bit about what your day-to-day job is?
Perfect. I'm Katharina Hoepner. I'm head of impact at ExecuShe, and what we do is we track weekly updates on the head count of women on executive tables, right? And now also the power, where we just look into a moment. So I believe there's quite some data around on about women on board, and this is like the main measure currently, right, for measuring gender diversity. And I wouldn't say it's not a good one, but we need to go deeper. We need to go further. This is what I think is important, because look at the official structure, and then you have the board as being the supervisor board, and they have all the power, but they are part-time. Maybe they meet 10 times a year, right? You can name them. They can come from outside of your company. And the executives actually are those doing the day-to-day business. And I really believe it's important to go deeper into what you mentioned before, into power, and to look at executives and then the actual shareholding. We look at the value, but not at the value because of being rich, but the value to understand actually the decision-making power they hold.
I think it's really interesting you talking about boards and the fact that they're part-time. And a lot of campaigns out there and initiatives out there are looking at seeing more women on boards. Um, and you were just saying that actually what's important is the executive team, the women that are doing the day-to-day decision making in companies. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what the figures around gender diversity in those executive roles,
Yeah,
yeah, looks
sh-
like?
sure.
Yeah.
You have the Spencer Stewart boards study for the UK, for instance, where you just have more women on board now than men. It's 51% for independent directors. This is important to notice, right? Independent, those guys are not executives. When it goes to executives, it should be somewhere around 14%, so it's already dropping the number. And Andreas even goes as far to call this a red herring. He would say, look, everyone focus on the board, but actually the power is still predominantly in male hands. You can go that far, you cannot, up to you, but what is the fact that on the executive level you have 25% of women? That's already good, but it has to get better. But then if you move on to the gender share, which is the measure we use for measuring power, it drops below 1%. So, like, we understand that the actual shareholding is relevant because they have decision-making power, right? They're not just the employee, but they actually have a partly ownership at the company. So this really needs to be more balanced. You look like it, I can show you later if you want. You have like 25% of female executives. Now I'm talking about S&P 500 because this is where we already have the concrete numbers, but we expand globally this month. Um, and then you go down to shareholding in general, just the question, are women shareholders? Not, it drops to 20%. That's okay still. And then you go to the share value, which is the actual power, and it drops below 1%. This is really something we have to work on, I believe. Like, I was personally shocked when I saw it because I grew up believing that, we have women rights, we have women's suffrage was achieved around 100 years ago. And now I'm with the question, so how far did we get, right? It's sort of from equal rights, that's great, but we need to get to equal power.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm sure you've got some slides of some of the figures that you can share in the moment, in a moment. So let's just talk about what gender share actually means. What is that? So this is the one that you say is representative of power, and the gender share for women is less than 1%, right? Which is shocking, it's super worrying. What does that actually mean in practice?
Gender share is you take, so let's look at it. It's first the head count. This is easy to understand, right? How many, which is the percentage of women sitting in the executive team. Then you look at the shareholders, just how many of all executives are 100% shareholders, and then you take the women and look at the percentage. This is the 20% I mentioned before for SP 500. And then you go to gender share, and what we do is we add the share value. So um, you just take all executives again, the entire share value held in their hands, and then you take the female percentage. This is when it drops below 1%. And now we're talking about, with these numbers, about overall executives. So like you can connect it to one company and measure company by company, right? So you would just see like one company has 5%, the other 10. But if I talk about 1%, it's about overall executives if you just look at them all together in one pool.
Right, okay. And by value, you mean the financial value of those shares that the women
Yeah,
own?
the share value, the current share value, like this changes, of course, frequently. So this is a very current measure.
All right. Do you want to show us some kind of images or some infographics? Do you have some slides?
Yeah, like it depends on the person. I always like to see numbers instead of just hearing them. So just what I told you right now, I
Yeah.
could show you. So these are just the numbers I just told you about. Um, this is now for S&P 500, and this is the head count. It's 24% if you look at companies. And if you look at universe, it dropped like it's 25, it's even a bit higher. These are the numbers which I mentioned about shareholding. Just the question, are women shareholders, yes or no? Still looks quite nice. And then it drops to below 1% if you go for the universe, like comparing all executives, and it's still at 11% if you compare company by company. And then we have a breakdown with 70 plus positions, which I think is also highly interesting because it makes more visible the patterns of power as well. Because there are these typical male positions, like CEO is the biggest typical male position. We have it here. And here you see that the gender diversity is 6% only at CEO level. And then shareholding still looks nice, but it goes to gender share. It's like even less than for overall. And this at a CEO level, which is actually the person holding quite a lot of power in the company, right? And we just compared here the typical male position, CEO, with a typical female position, which is HR. Like if you look at the top female position, not a surprise, they all have a sort of social connotation. And this is looking really well. This is how everything should look like. But if you look back at these numbers, you can easily understand that those positions that usually have a huge share value is CEO, and then you have executive share, and you have founder. And these three positions are usually in male hands, and this is why the gender share is looking that bad currently.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are so interesting and scary. But what do you think the implications are for women just in their everyday lives?
So now I'm guessing, of course, because I don't know. But my hope is that if the top level has diversity in there, and now we talk about gender, but you could, of course, just look at ethnicity or any other measures, right? And we're working on that as well. Um, that then the company culture would become more diverse just because I would think, right? If it's a diverse team, would they decide to have a gender pay gap in their company? I hope not. Would they decide to have better conditions for parental leave? I hope not. So it hopefully would influence the company structure, but also the products. I don't know, like there is this book from Carolina Ricardo Perez, Invisible Women, about the gender data gap, where she describes a world made for a default male. I would at least hope that the top elite being more diverse would create products that take diversity into account, apart from obviously just having role models for our kids and whatever, right? But this is my hope that if you go to the top level where power is, that then it has effect on overall culture and hopefully in the best sense. Yeah. So for me personally, I wish that like for let's say I have two kids, right? That for them they could just choose what they want to be. That this data can actually open up pathways. I don't want to push anyone and say you have to become an executive, but there should be the option, and the way should be as easy for everyone. And finally, it doesn't matter if it's for becoming an executive or for doing the care work. It's not to judge which is more relevant, right? But that for them it's normal to do what they want and to follow their aims, like for my kids speaking now, instead of going into this, yeah, role model that they see in everyday life and understanding that this is just not for women somehow. This would be my hope.
Mm.
Mm.
So, are there any companies that were doing particularly bad or particularly good?
Well, yes, but so when you just look, as it's usually done right now, and at one measure, which now is the board, then it's really easy to just say these are the best ones, these are the worst ones. But we believe we have to go deeper and look into headcount of the executives and then even into power. So then it's not that simple anymore to say this is the best one, this is the worst one. So it's a bit up to everyone else, to everyone himself, herself, to decide on the measures and how you want to put them. But I can definitely talk about those companies that I really like, or not that much like, in this sense. I really look into the power. This is important for me. And you can, so if you take a list of the top, just by person, the top people, the top power people by gender share, then the first women appearing in the list is on number 33, and it's Jayshree Uller from Arista Networks. And I definitely like this company because it's like the most powerful woman. This is a good thing for me. But if you go deeper, their head count is not too good, and you could criticize them on other ends. So my personal really favorite one is advanced micro devices, because this is number two. This is Lisa T. Su. She's the CEO. Overall power position is, I think, let me check, 69. But she's actually in the semiconductor industry, and semiconductor industry is like the worst industry for headcount back since we have our weekly data, which is 2020. They are around 14%. So also her company is not too good on headcount. I mean, it's just related to the industry, I believe. But it's not just that they have the second most powerful woman, but also that the overall gender share, like if you take all executives, is almost 50-50. It's 41 to 58. But this is quite nice. I like that that they're this balanced already. And you have to take into account both women, Jayshree Ulal and Lisa Tisu, are both women in STEM. They both have an engineering background, which is also just typically a really male field. So I don't know, I admire them because they really made it up in a field where I don't think it was too easy, like guessing from outside. And then bad examples, I would go for Tesla. So, and there you see, it's the world is complex. Tesla, of course, is a really important company if you look into climate. Like without Tesla and their car manufacturing, we would still need way more years for electric cars. So I really admire them in this sense. But the executive teams are 4 men, 0 woman, and of course, then the gender share is just 0 to 100. So there's just no women included. And you can go further. You can look at Amazon, you can look at Netflix. Those are also companies that do have women in their team. Let me just take, to give you the right numbers, I noted them down here. So Amazon has 14% of women head count, and Netflix has even 44%. So you look at that and you think, wow, this is a great company. But if you then go one step further to actually the power level, Amazon has gender share of 0.1% to 99.99, and the same for Netflix. So uh, let me say it this way. I believe the board is a good first step, and it's now time to move further and look at the executives. And I really appreciate if there's diversity on the executive table, but then again, we need to walk the next step and look into the power. And possibly there are other measures that we will measure in the future to really understand the picture even deeper. So what I believe is you really have to go step by step to get to the core imbalance, let's say, that we are having currently in our world.
what do men, these findings? Have you been showing men, and what are men's response to what they're seeing?
So,
Are you finding you are creating male allies around this, or are they finding it difficult?
so I can just give a brief idea here because we all only launched it this year in January, and I only returned from maternity really a short time ago. Um, So I, what I experienced that people are shocked by these numbers, like the ratio 1 to 99 when it comes to gender share was covered from Bloomberg and then actually in quite some international press. And it were actually mainly male journalists covering it, not only, of course, but mainly. So I personally hope for that we do this change together, right? Like we talk a lot about gender and maybe about patriarchal patterns that are still really present these days. But I just think we have to co-work on changing it, and this includes obviously men as allies. They are the group in power. So it's always, doesn't matter if it's gender or ethnicity or whatever, the group in power is the one that has to work with us. But I did not get any bad response or something like that, if this was a bit your question about. So I do believe there, I do hope for that we can drive this change together.
So let's look to solutions.
Mhm.
What can we do about this? So let's start with companies. What can companies do to turn this around?
Well, they can report, they can be transparent. The more they report on their diversity, the more transparency there is, and the more you can like, yeah, just invest or not invest, and then they can of course internally change. And I do believe that in many companies you have a diversity, a chief diversity officer or similar, that there are people already working on these topics and they try to get more diversity into their teams. But of course, over the long time, they have to question who's holding the shares in my company. And is this fair or is it not fair? Who are the women in which position there are? Can I, like you can also decide that the HR is just more powerful person. You can give her more shares. It's sort of we decide which position is actually of which value. And the companies decide on the diversity so they can just support women and rising up because we said that before, right? Boards, you can just name them. If it's independent board members, you get for a professor or you go for a politician, and then you name her. She's not related with the company. The executives usually grow internally. So I guess the best thing is you can grow women up to the power positions and report. So I really believe transparency is a good thing. Not all companies, like some companies, report on just one executive. H&M, she only reports on one CEO. Great, it's a woman, but all others are just named as chief financial officer, chief operation officer, and there's just no transparency around. So I think just creating this information is also of value.
Yes, and what I understand is that companies with more diverse executive teams do better financially. Is this something, do you understand that?
There are studies about that. So I have to be honest here. I'm not the one who would really be able to judge that on a professional level. So I know there are findings about that diverse companies have better outcomes also on climate change, also on profit. Um, and I can just give you my really personal idea. I can absolutely imagine that this is the case, but I would then not be able to tell you if the diversity creates the profit or the good outcome on climate change, or if it's just showing that the company itself has really open, a modern approach, that they really use the entire pool of talent, right? Because if you just go for male, you lose 50% of the talent that's out there. So I could not say that women are better. Andreas would go and say the median man, the median woman are just as good, but he believes that on the male side you have quite some peaks of just really toxic masculinity. Just look at Putin or someone alike. So he would believe on average we are the same, but then male have a peak of toxic masculinity, which on the female side there isn't. But that's what he would say here. I just think use the entire pool and you will get better for sure. And of course, we have like a diverse team has, yeah, just it's richer, right? Doesn't matter if it's gender or ethnicity or whatever. It's just richer. You have more perspectives. You have a huge understanding. If you then really manage to work in a team, I believe everyone experienced that when you work in a team. If you have a diverse team and you have a good team, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, let's talk about what investors can do. So the people invested in these companies.
Well, I think what they should do, they should just use this data for their investment. So we also have a rating on the website of for the asset managers. So we actually look at the head count and then the gender share of the institutional investors. And I believe that head count may be something, at least when it comes to CEO, CFO, they're aware of. But then when it comes to the actual gender share, the power they're just not aware of. So if you use it for your investment decision, you can redirect cash flows. Like you asked for examples before. I'm not having the clear numbers now in my head, but it's something like this. Like if you look at the Gates Foundation, I think they really have good intentions and they have no company with no female executives. But if you then look at the gender power, the numbers is really, really bad. Like the gender share overall, I'm not going to say, I would have to look it up. I can send it to you afterwards, but it's a really bad number. It's one of the worst institutional investors we have in the database. And I don't think it's on purpose. It's rather, do they know about? So I believe, yeah, institutional investors, they have a set of metrics they are aware of for their decision, for the investment decision, and they can just use this data to add it to it. And
Hmm. No, thank you. And okay, and then finally, what can we do as professional women? Um, where do we have some power to try and to change this issue?
so I'm also happy, like, happy you to share as well. I think this is something where we really can share with each other and then just get clearer of where we can leverage. Um, I think it's good to know it. It's good to talk about it. It's good to be aware of it. And that's just for everyone. Then, if you have a pension fund, you can just talk to a pension fund. I think I read this on your website actually, right? Like the money is working anyhow. So use it as a tool and create, like, make it in line with your personal values. And so use the data there for your pension. But then, if you're, for example, a woman that's rather high up in the hierarchy, like there was this misogynic comment on Amanda Blank, I think in May, right? And she actually wrote on LinkedIn that the higher up she got in the structure, the worse it got to this aspect. So I believe all these women that are climbing the ladder, I hope that this data can support them by asking for my shares, but also to understand I'm not promoted. Maybe it's about me being a woman. So I can't tell because I don't know. I'm guessing here, but I would guess, and I read it about women in STEM, that you get up the ladder, and suddenly it stops. And if it's only one woman, you can say it's because of her as a characteristics not related to being a woman. But if you then look at the data, like look at the CEO data I showed you before. If you see how little CEOs there are and how worse is the share value, I hope this can just empower women to say this is a structural issue and I'm not going to leave the room unless you give me more share value, more power in my hands, to put it that simple, right? So this is what I hope. And I'm very happy to go and exchange and have other ideas how this data can be used. Of course, it can also just encourage women to go into STEM, right? Because you see the most powerful two women, these ladies come from an engineering background. So this is a highly male-dominated field. So it can also just empower women to say, yes, I'm going to go in this field because this is a field where I can gain power.
As initial ideas, I mean, those are all the good ones. Um, and I think, yeah, we just have to start by letting women know that this is a problem.
Yeah.
Um, and this is something that they need to think about because yeah, I think women are standing up for themselves more and more, and this is just another way that they can do that.
Yeah, and it's really, we got, it's 100 years we have women's suffrage, and the power is still that much in male hands. Like, I don't know, I didn't expect this to be
Mm.
that way. I thought I was told the story of, yeah, it's like a little bit missing. I mean, talking about the Western countries, right? A little bit missing for equality, but we're almost there. And no, we're not. There's still lots of work to do, which is okay. Let's just take it on and go for it. Yeah. And I think we can really challenge the system. So I don't know, you talk about regenerative finance, right? You mentioned that in an email, if this is actually a regenerative activity. And of course, it's not in the sense of when you invest in regenerative agriculture that does directly good on the environment, right? But I do believe it is if you go for the social, like for the patriarchal patterns, because you do challenge the structure. And you could then combine it, of course. Maybe you would not like to invest in a female CEO with a great power, but in fossil fuels. So you may just combine it with other aspects for your investment. But personally, I do believe it's a regenerative active in this social sense, right? In the social sense of challenging the imbalance that hundreds of years ago. It's there with us. So it's time to move further and move forward.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for relating it back to
Mm.
regeneration, because I actually think it is too.
Yeah.
I think it is a regenerative act. So yeah, it's good for you to pick up on that. Okay, so I think we'll kind of round it off. But I mean, what's next for you? Has this inspired any future research?
Yes. So we are. I mentioned it briefly before. So we launched ExecuShe now in January this year, and we are preparing for execunicity, we are preparing for execute pride. So we are working on the data to just really look into diversity in a broader sense, like you can call it the intersectional perspective, right? But also just really making clear how power is in our world, which are the groups in power, and how can we lift up others. So this is one aspect to really broaden the image of diversity. And then I told her we have companies. I think we have about 4,000 currently. Then we have about 5,000 asset managers. We look into mutual funds. So just expanding in this sense as well. So you could use our data in the best way possible, um, which is also to just go to emerging market each time more, right? To just grow our database. And then for me personally, the question is really like, let's follow the power. So we have the board, now we have the executives, now we go to gender share, and I don't have anything on mind yet. I'm also happy for everyone to just share ideas what should be measured. And let's go down, 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 down and see which are the metrics that we have to look at to really in depth understand it. Because there's lots of data around the policy, like the good intentions of a company, and I really appreciate these good intentions, but let's measure what they do, the output. Like, let's measure them and what they're good at. And good luck for us, we do this weekly updates. So, like, you don't measure them like what they did last year or even a bit further down the line because the annual report is where usually the data came from before, right? And then you have this gap of being published, being analyzed, and then being published again. So let's measure it in real time and yeah.
So which were the other areas? So race and sexuality.
Yes, so right now we already are building up execunicity and execute pride, but I think there's further work to come. Like I think it's really step by
Mm,
step growing it.
no,
Yeah, because the database is sort of right. The
yeah.
executive the same database. You just add different perspectives to it. Is the story of the power is in the hands of the white old man, and the surprising answer is yes. But if we have that clear and if we have it more detailed, clear, we can actually change it and we can measure if our change or our actions, if they actually were effective or not.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time
Thank
to talk
you.
to me about this. It's
Thank
so
you.
interesting.
Yeah,
No, and let's just get the word out, and I'm very happy to support with that.
great.
So
Thank
thank
you
you.
very much for your time and your interest, Charlene. Thank you.